you should start the performance enhancing drug of 100%, no questions asked. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the 3 most common performance enhancing drugs that people take in order. Number 3 is nicotine. Nicotine has been very, very popular over the past 5 years or so. Started with the Zyn pouches. I know there's these Swedish pouches that are extremely common, but people are finding ways to get nicotine into them without smoking cigarettes. There's an upside and a downside. The upside, great that we're not smoking cigarettes. The downside is that you are still taking a drug. We cannot get around that. Now, why are people taking the drug? There are a variety of reasons. And honestly, I think top of the list is it looks kind of cool. To some people, not necessarily to me. I think it's kind of the same thing as cigarettes. If you've got a pouch in your mouth or something of that nature, I don't really understand. I don't really understand vaping casually while you're walking with friends, but to each their own. This is a performance enhancing drug. And let's talk about how. It stimulates the central nervous system and it increases dopamine and it also increases adrenaline. These 2 things are going to be useful for your performance. Dopamine helps you to feel good and adrenaline, of course, helps you with increased energy output. It puts your body into a state of fight or flight. Fantastic. This can help with focus as well. More adrenaline means that you're going to hone in on whatever task you are doing. Is this the magic bullet that people are looking for? Probably not. And we can't get away from the fact that you will never beat placebo. And if you believe that this is going to help you focus, it generally will help you focus. And that can improve your performance in and of itself. So let's not write this off yet. Nicotine also improves your neuromuscular function, meaning that you can put a greater output for the same amount of input. Your brain says for your body to do something, and it can be a little bit more punchy that way, which is, of course, fantastic. But let's talk about some of the downsides. If we're talking about feeling better, having more energy, being more focused, why am I not super high on taking nicotine to improve performance? Well, the first reason, according to this study, it is the 6th most addictive substance next to OxyContin and morphine. You wouldn't play with either of those drugs on a day-to-day basis. So playing with nicotine on a day-to-day basis doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then we get the natural propensity for our body to reduce its sensitivity to things it's exposed to on a regular basis. Let's start with adrenaline. Constant high levels of adrenaline are associated with very bad health outcomes. It also means that for the same amount of adrenaline output, you're going to have a reduced effect on yourself. So when you absolutely need that adrenaline, if you've been having low doses of adrenaline for a prolonged period of time, it's not going to be the most useful thing for you, and it's not going to provide the response that you're looking for. This means that maybe nicotine will help you on your training days, but when it comes to competition day, you're so used to adrenaline being there that it's not really going to do a whole lot of good. Add that on to the fact that sleep and recovery go hand in hand. Increased adrenaline means reduced sleep efficiency, means worse performance over time, and increased injury risk. When it comes to dopamine, of course, it's a feel-good hormone. That's fantastic. But dopamine exposure on a constant basis, again, means that dopamine is going to start to mean nothing to you. Starting to feel like you're in a good mood, feel happy, it's going to be more and more difficult as time goes on. We also can't ignore the cardiovascular effects that nicotine has. It's been well studied in cigarettes. And we can't pretend that that doesn't still have an effect if you take it in a different form. It tends to increase your blood pressure and it tends to make your blood stickier, 2 things that lead to long-term cardiovascular damage. Now, we're talking performance enhancing drugs. So there's a side of performance where you can say, I'm actually willing to sacrifice some of my health to be performative. But if you're not healthy, you can't perform. So this is a fine line to walk, and one that I don't find myself interested in walking at all, particularly when we say that it's a substance slightly more addictive than morphine. Next up is one that I do actually like. Number 2 most commonly used performance enhancing drug is caffeine. This is in every single pre-workout for the most part, and it can be a massive energy boost. We talk about cups of coffee, we talk about pre-workout, we talk about pop, we talk about Rain energy drinks, many different ways in which we can get caffeine. This is a very, very useful performance enhancing drug, but should be taken with a level of caution. Let's talk about why. So when blood goes into your brain, not every substance in your blood is exposed to your brain because our body has inbuilt mechanisms to protect the brain from being exposed to these things. You don't want every single thing that you ingest and absorb to interact with your brain. So we have something called the blood-brain barrier, and this is exactly what it sounds like. It stops certain substances from getting across to the brain whilst others are allowed in. Caffeine is one of the few substances that are allowed in. So whilst it's very common for people to take caffeine and to consume caffeine, it shouldn't be assumed that this is because it doesn't have a substantial effect on us. It actually does to an incredible degree. Crossing the blood-brain barrier and interacting directly with your brain, something that most substances don't do and something that should be taken very seriously. Let's talk about how caffeine works. So adenosine is a neurotransmitter in the brain. It constantly accumulates, and it accumulates more and more as you exert energy. And it signals your brain to essentially be fatigued. It decreases your neural activity, increases your drowsiness, increases your relaxation, and it dilates your blood vessels to improve oxygen flow. Dilate, of course, meaning get larger. All of these things trying to help you come down and relax. Caffeine binds directly to those receptors, meaning that adenosine can't bind to those receptors for a period of time. When caffeine unbinds and it clears your system, we now have this huge accumulation of adenosine that now interacts with those receptors, and you have a massive crash. This is unavoidable. There is no company, no pre-workout, no substance that involves caffeine that doesn't come with a crash for this physiological reason. It either doesn't come with caffeine or you have a massive downside on the back end. I talk a lot about caffeine when it comes to competing and it comes to training, because if you have a training session and you mistime your caffeine, or it's a very long training session, you're going to have that adenosine dump into your brain. Well, it's already there, but interacting with the receptors, that means that you're going to have a massive crash. Understanding this really basic physiology can give you an understanding that there is no way that you're going to avoid this crash post caffeine. Reduced energy, reduced output at the end of a session, at the end of a competition, can spell disaster. Now, that being said, used appropriately, used intelligently, caffeine can be an incredibly useful tool to increase your energy. Although it will only do this for a couple of hours at a time. The half-life of caffeine is 5 hours, and the elimination half-life is between 1.5 and 9.5 hours. Let's talk about performance. Half-life of 5 hours gives a reasonably long period of time where it's going to have an effect on you, but that's where it's cut in half. So it's going to hit your system within half an hour of consuming it. And then from that time, you're going to reach a peak pretty soon. And then it's just going to be decline, 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 decline. And as it declines, adenosine is going to build up. So whilst half of it is gone in 5 hours, you're going to have less than 5 hours to get the maximum effect from that caffeine. I would estimate 2 to 2.5 hours until you actually experience that energy dump and you are fried. If we talk about elimination half-life, 9.5 hours on the long end. We get back to the conversation about sleep and recovery. If it takes 9.5 hours to get out of your system, well, even taking it at 12 o'clock, midday, or an early afternoon training session, you're going to have these receptors that are used primarily to help you relax, sleep, wind down. You're going to have them occupied by something that's inhibiting you from sleeping, relaxing, and winding down. To me, this is a pretty dangerous prospect and something that I wouldn't mess with a whole lot. There's also one important thing to recognize. There's research that shows about 1/3 of people don't react to caffeine. I personally am one of those people. I could have a black coffee or a Rain energy drink straight before I go to bed and still sleep. Now, if you're one of these people, there are physiological properties to caffeine that we can't ignore and that still work even if we don't feel an increased boost in energy. But if you're one of these people, what's the point of drinking caffeine just for the sake of raising your blood pressure, of making you a little bit sweatier, of giving you heart palpitations? You should probably go to decaf and use caffeine only as a performance-enhancing drug and not as something that you rely on daily to get yourself out of bed. And that would be my ultimate advice with caffeine. Use this as a performance-enhancing drug, but don't use it for your day-to-day life. You develop a really strong dependency on caffeine the more you use it, and ultimately, your adenosine receptors upregulate, so you're going to get more and more fatigued without caffeine if you stop taking it, or if you continue to take it over a long period of time. This just creates a bad cycle. You have more and more adenosine sensitivity, more and more caffeine. You chase this for eternity. There's no getting around it. Now, the number one performance enhancing drug. I've gone a bit out of order because this is certainly not more popular than caffeine, but it's creatine. And creatine is not even really a drug. And this is my favorite performance enhancing drug that I believe anyone watching this video should take. It is the most researched supplement next to whey protein, has next to no negative side effects, and improves your performance dramatically within days of taking it. Creatine is simply an energy source. It's found in meat and animal products. When we ingest it, it goes into our muscles and it binds to phosphate molecules. The whole objective of movement is to find and create phosphate to be able to facilitate muscular contraction, of course, down the chain a little bit. If we have that phosphate generally as ATP, that is going to convert to ADP. We donate the phosphate, energy happens. Fantastic. This is how we move. This is how we get energy. Now, supplementary creatine is just going to have you upregulate the amount of creatine you have in your system. More creatine means more phosphocreatine, means more phosphates available to be donated to ADP to turn it to ATP to then be available to donate that one phosphate for extra energy. Creatine is something you should be taking 5 to 10 grams a day. There are no downsides, literally zero downsides that anyone has experienced. There are very few people who can't take this. And the only one I know of that definitely can't take it are people going in for blood work because it can skew your blood work, and pregnant people likely for the same reason. We want an accurate picture of what's going on. But otherwise, creatine is the energy source for the first 5 seconds of exercise, no matter what you're doing. Even if I stand up out of this chair, I am going to be using creatine. We have ATP stores, very, very small, maybe a half a second to 1 second of energy. Then we shift to creatine stores, and then we shift to carbohydrates. This is partially because the storage mechanisms become more and more efficient as we go down that pathway. But as storage becomes more efficient, utilization becomes less efficient, where fat is always on the furthest end of least efficient to be able to be used, but most efficient for storage. If we take creatine, we might be able to take that 5 seconds of energy that we get from it and extend it to 8 seconds, 10 seconds that you're able to get from that creatine store. If you do this, it's carbohydrate sparing. It's much more potent for being able to get quick energy when you're doing your lifts. And ultimately, it's going to help you perform better and recover better. Creatine is not something that you need to cycle off. It's not something that you need to have a break from. It's not something that's going to touch your hormones. It's not anything that's going to mess with your health. It doesn't increase your blood pressure. It doesn't hurt your kidneys. Literally, there is no downside. You should start the performance enhancing drug of creatine. 100%, no questions asked. It's not a gateway drug. It is not a steroid. It is nothing untoward. It is legal in every single country in the world that I'm aware of, and it's relatively cheap. If I give you that pitch for anything that's going to improve your performance, should be an absolute no-brainer. I'll put a link down in the description to mutant creatine, but honestly, creatine monohydrate, it is good enough. Don't take this as a plug for supplements. Take this as good, sound, reasonable advice. Creatine, male, female, old, young, non-negotiable. You should be taking it and reaping the rewards. Let me know what you thought of this video. The most common performance-enhancing drugs that people use, and maybe you learned something as well. Go ahead, pop in the comments what you learned, if you learned anything, and what performance-enhancing drug of these 3 that you take and you find benefit from. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, go ahead and do that up there. And until tomorrow, lift heavy and be kind.